everybody. Welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's Francis, and I'm here with Jack Murphy. Jack is a fellow podcaster with the Team House Pod. He has his own military podcast and does a lot of really great investigative reporting as well. Jack, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me on the show. Just another day in the office, the home office, I suppose.
You've got a nice recording studio. I have a shack. I have a pod shack, as I call it. I had a nice office built out, but then I saw you were posting pictures and you're like, oh, look, we've got these comfortable couches. We've got sound dampeners on the walls. I'm like, man, that's what a real professional podcast looks like.
Yeah, it took some time to build up to that, but we moved from our original studio, a small studio space in a basement in Brooklyn, and then we moved to the slightly larger one, that like we have our own bathroom and it's big enough that we can have two sets in there and have room for everything. So yeah, I mean, kind of like the dream was to build it out to look like a cigar lounge. And, one person described it as looking like JFK's nuclear bunker.
Just put like a bunch of TV set in the wall and you'll be good to go. You can watch the world fall apart from the podcast bunker. Yeah, I had a shed built and then I finished off the inside with insulation and drywall. So but I also work from home. So I just kind of live out here now.
That works, man. I mean, I work from home also. I mean, when I'm not in the studio doing that podcast show, so like I'm in my place and you'll probably hear the buzzer going off as the Amazon guy has like something for someone in the building somewhere, and you'll just hear like in the middle of your interview.
Yeah. For me, it's if my dog is in the backyard, she will just start going batshit over God knows what. She's 100-pound Pyrenees, so when she barks, everybody knows about it. All right, so Jack, I wanted to bring you on because you had a really interesting story come out. I say interesting. The headline is a real slap in the face for anybody, as it says, "Panic grips Special Forces community amid investigation into drugs and human trafficking." And I wish that, we could say, oh, what a shocking revelation that's coming out of a special forces group, but it's really not. We have, on this show, I've talked to Seth Harp, who did an investigation into a lot of, murders that were happening down in Fort Bragg. And it seems that's still kind of continuing. So, and you were special forces, correct?
Yeah. Okay. I was in fifth group.
Yeah, so you have a relationship and an understanding of these people, but I do appreciate that you are former special forces who doesn't do the like, they're just what are they supposed to do? It's like, well, not traffic humans first is what you should not do. As I'm sure that, I'm sure that you get a lot of pushback on when you say, hey, look at these guys who are doing drugs and, trafficking children. And then other people are like, well, why would you do that to these guys? Like, well, they're doing drugs and trafficking humans, which is bad. You shouldn't do those things.
I mean, I've gotten a ton of pushback over the years because I've covered stories like this. Domestic violence stories, suicides, murders, missing persons, sex scandals, blackmail scandals in special forces. And third group probably has a death warrant out on me. But I mean, it is what it is. It's like, hey, stop beating up your wives. And, these women end up in my inbox out of desperation because they have nowhere else to go. And the system just fucked them over and over again. And so, yeah, some of these guys who get angry with me, I wish they'd ask themselves the question, like, why do your teammates and your wives keep ending up coming to me? Have you ever stopped to think about why that is?
Right. It is kind of an incredulous kind of like, they're raping children. So why are you telling me that I'm wrong?
With this story, I would say, I think this has a slightly different tone. And I think maybe the dam has broken with this one. And most of the special forces veterans I know have been like, holy shit. Like, if this is true, like it's time to clean house. I've talked
when it's when there's a murder, when a Green Beret just shows up with their head severed, that's just kind of a one-off. But it
Yeah, I
takes,
know, man. I know. Some of the murders and things we've seen in the past, and war crimes, and just really terrible things. And people act like that's just either the cost of doing business, or fuck it, it's war, man. It's like, ugh.
yeah, and of course, the change in let me ask, when did you get out of the military?
2010.
Okay, so you spent time like I did as well, that first decade of the whole war, before we were doing counterinsurgency and when we were just door kicking. The hard change into, hey, now you guys got to go over there and be nice to people. And I don't think anybody told special forces that, because Nate has multiple. He was an infantry officer in Afghanistan, and he has multiple stories about, yeah, we were doing great, and then special forces came in and fucked everything up by like making everybody hate us, because they your local populace can't tell the difference between, hey, we want to come out and get you guys a well, and we're going to give candy to the kids, and then later on tonight a bunch of other dudes with guns and uniforms kick in your door and shoot a couple people and drag other people onto a helicopter. So it makes counterinsurgency in hearts and minds a little difficult to win.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the bigger criticisms of special operations, and the JSOC task force especially, that they would come in the night in helicopters and do a raid, and a bunch of people get shot up, and then the conventional unit that actually is assigned to that area of operations has to deal with the fallout, because when the locals want revenge because you killed their kids or whatever, they're going to lash out at the Americans that are closest to them, which ends up being some leg unit, just like regular dudes who are driving down the street, and their Humvee gets IED'd, and it's in retaliation for something that JSOC did a month prior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a long line of a whole lot of fuck ups in Afghanistan that we could go on for hours about, but we
Yeah.
don't have that kind of time. So as I mentioned earlier, there have been like other really kind of heinous murders, and there wasn't. I believe there was a full bird colonel or a light colonel that held his own family hostage, and they let
Yeah.
him
Owen Ray.
retire.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was Owen Ray.
Yeah, there was the guys that went camping, and the Green Beret showed up without a head for some reason, and the six guys that went with him are just like, I don't know what you're talking about.
He was 82nd Airborne. He wasn't
Oh, okay.
Special Forces. Yeah, and then his head washed up on shore like 6 weeks later or something like that. Like,
Hmm.
and that's still unsolved, by the way.
Yeah, that's and just also, of course, in the general area of Fort Bragg, I know that special forces all kind of live in their own enclave, and the cops are just kind of like, that's just special forces. We just don't, because we don't, unless it becomes a thing where it's like, hey, somebody is actually like gunned down at this point, and it seems like that happens a lot. Like special forces guys will just show up, with a bullet in them here in the States, and it's kind of like, well, it was a drug thing gone wrong, or it was this, that, or the other thing. And it really doesn't seem like a lot of that there's a lot of scrutiny being done to this, like from journalists. Like Seth Harp has done it, you've done it, but I don't really see anybody really, like Vanessa Guillen's murder was front page,
Yeah.
and for good reason. But like also there's other problems happening. There's this problem, and it's not just third. It's never just one group. You turn on the light, you see one cockroach scurry. There's 100 in the walls. So it does become like this kind of, we need to do some sort of systematic house cleaning, and I don't know if that's something that they're going to do. Like, does it seem like they're kind of going that direction?
Uh, I think it remains to be seen. I mean, right now, what you're seeing at Bragg is the fallout of the most recent scandal, and whether or not that turns out to be just like a knee jerk reaction, or does it lead to some sort of like real systemic change, I don't know. I mean, my faith in the Army criminal justice system and CID is close to zero. When there's some sort of like real meaningful accountability, it seems like it's almost by accident. Um, so, I mean, even these guys who have been rolled up recently over the last week, I would not be surprised if the charges are dropped on all of them because of some procedural mishap or because of a lack of evidence. I mean, I'm just speculating on this, of course, and maybe I shouldn't be so pessimistic. But I tend to be, fairly skeptical of CID and JAG actually prosecuting people.
Yeah, especially if we're talking about an entire special forces group. So it looks like they did 100% recall for First Battalion. In the battalion, we're looking at like how many people is that? In for Special Forces Battalion, how many people is that
Oh
generally?
shit! I mean, altogether, I mean 300 something like that.
And so they had them all pee in a cup. Do the urinalysis, and in the proper world, the Army, when you pop hot on a piss test, it comes down to your command. It comes down to the needs of the Army and things like that. It comes down to how good of a soldier you've been in the past, if you got a little weed in your system. But I imagine that's not what's happening here. I imagine a lot of these guys are going to come up hot for weed and cocaine and things like that. And
Yeah.
you're probably right. There's going to be a just like, well, don't do that again and move on with it because, hey, it takes a while to train a special forces guy, and it's hard to find them.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, this might be big enough that they actually have to take some action. Um, I mean, to back up a little bit, this whole recent thing that has blown up on Fort Bragg and has enraptured the special ops community and sent a lot of people panicking. It goes back to last month when there was a special forces soldier. This is public information at this point. His name's Christopher Looney, and he was arrested for, and I'm looking at the charges right now: kidnapping, statutory rape of a child, human trafficking with a child victim, and indecent liberties with a child. And that's right off of his arrest record. Um, I have been told by several sources at this point that when they got a hold of him, they ripped his phone. They got information off of his cell phone, and that is essentially what led to the MPs and CID questioning, and it looks like charging. They questioned 15 soldiers. They're not all being charged. Some of them, the charges have been dropped. And I'm looking at another document right now. Those guys, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 guys right now that I know of for sure. They're being charged with felony use of cocaine, and in one case, charged with tampering and helping to tamper with urinalysis. So
You can't do that. I was a UPL once upon a time. You can't do that, guys.
the secret ingredient is crime.
Yeah.
So they got this one dude, Looney, who, what I've been told about him is that he was moonlighting as a dancer, or moonlighting as a bouncer at O'Donnell's, which is a special forces bar in Southern Pines, North Carolina, right next to the base. It's where the SF guys and Delta guys hang out there all the time. And while he was moonlighting there, he had a thing for really young girls, and he started pimping some of them and actually pimping underage girls to other guys in the special ops community. And he also linked up with another guy who has been questioned and then released to his unit, also in 3rd Special Forces Group, who was a drug dealer. And he was dealing drugs to a lot of guys in group, cocaine, fentanyl, roofies, ecstasy, shrooms, all that kind of stuff. And his nickname is the War Criminal because of the he has a natural birthmark on his face that looks like he's wearing like war paint, apparently. And
but also,
yeah, and also he allegedly. All claims are alleged until these guys are proven guilty in a court of law. Of course, allegedly he also carried around a bag full of thermite grenades in Afghanistan and would just like burn shit down just like wantonly. again, we'll see if that turns out, and we'll see what happens with him as well.
They took the flamethrowers away, and that's all you got left, I guess.
Yeah, thermite grenades. So these two guys, were, as I'm told, working together to some extent. One provided the girls, one provided the drugs for these like wild parties that happened in Southern Pines. Some of them at private residences, and some interesting people came walking through the door. And I would not be surprised if this investigation ends up snaring some higher ranking individuals, like the E905 type level. Uh, and it's all centered around, I shouldn't say it's all centered around, but I guess the epicenter of it is the drug dealers ODA 3135. And then it sort of like spreads its tentacles out there through the rest of the battalion. And I'm certainly not saying everyone in the battalion or everyone in third group is involved in criminal activity, but this is a subculture that has spread throughout, largely in First Battalion, and then it reaches its tentacles outwards elsewhere.
I can't imagine that, maybe you're not partaking, but I can't imagine that you don't know it's happening.
Yeah, exactly, man. Especially the way that guys are so close on a team. I mean, I was on an ODA, and I knew which guys were using steroids. It wasn't like a secret. And
no,
I mean, I guess
it never, and even in the regular army, like it's never really a secret who's doing what. And, it comes down to, do you turn this person in? How is that going to, affect whatever else is going on? For us, we were just making our own booze under our bunks in Iraq. So, as long as nobody was getting, shit hammered and shooting their rifles off into the air, we were fine. We were not doing, well, I don't know if people were getting hashish, but we certainly weren't doing steroids. We were all public affairs. So,
yeah, I mean, there's some of this stuff like it's certainly wrong, but if a guy has a drug addiction, is addicted to fentanyl, like that's the sort of thing like you send somebody to rehab for, and like you can bro hug it out, and hopefully they can come back to work. That'd be like a mature way to handle that. But then some of these crimes are, it's like we can't really be friends if this is what you're into. You know what I'm saying? Like there's
there's a certain, as you said, these guys are getting hit with IEDs. They probably, all of them have done, if they've been in long enough. How many deployments did you do in like 10 years? Yeah, 10 years of Afghanistan. You did 3 years. A lot of these guys.
Well, I mean, me, in my case, I did 3 months in Afghanistan and then 3 months in Iraq with Ranger Battalion. And then I did 6 months in Iraq with 5th Group.
Right. But there's a lot of rotations out. And there's a lot of high operation tempo, especially for special forces.
Oh, yeah.
So like look, I came back with a drinking problem and I was public affairs. So I understand having a drinking problem in the army. I understand doing cocaine because you're sad. I don't do that, but I understand people who do it. And there is that kind of like, look, yes, it sucks. I'm sorry that these things happen to you. However, if you are selling or buying underage girls, that becomes a problem. That goes beyond the I'm doing drugs to make myself feel happy. You're doing something.
Yeah,
I have no problem if you destroy yourself, but don't destroy somebody else.
Yeah, we can have some empathy for a dude who has like 15 deployments and the guy's like PTSD'd out and TBIs have just, literally changed the dude's mental process. He's not the same guy, and that's not his fault, right? But when we start getting into, and there haven't been any war crimes allegations in this particular scandal thus far, but when we start talking about like murder, we start talking about human trafficking, we start talking about domestic violence, it's like we're crossing some lines here, to say the least.
Right. You should have been recognizing this and seeking help for it before we got to a point where you're holding your own children hostage. Like my sympathy goes to a certain point, and then it's just like, look, if you get shot, that's on you, man. I can't help
exactly.
it. I think one of my favorite quotes in here, let's see, was this is what happens when there's no war, no direction, an 18-month red cycle with no missions, the Special Forces soldier said. Dudes are fucking around with young kids and the craziest drugs. All these lives ruined because people were just bored. Well, again, I understand what is being said here. Special forces, infantry, all of the combat arms are basically a bunch of young guys that you say, hey, why don't you guys go lift for 2 hours a day, and then we're gonna like shake you up in a can of bees and then throw you out onto the into the Peshawar Valley and let you loose. I can understand that the changeover to counterinsurgency or the not having missions can be a problem. Pick up learn piano, play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, take up oil painting.
Yeah, there are so many. Like I have color, adult coloring books, not adult like sexy, but adult like ones that are just a little bit more complicated. I have a podcast. I make my own. I make my own soaps by hand. I have things that I do that are calming and don't involve human trafficking. I'm just saying there's other options that you can go with if you are bored on the post. Buy a Camaro and get really into Madden. That's what all the guys I knew did.
Yeah, man. And I think, most of the guys in special ops, I mean, there's a larger conversation here, but I mean, yeah, most of them get into like CrossFit or even like yoga is a thing now. And, they can find something, some sort of outlet. But I mean, I think the bigger conversation there, and like, I can say this now as a guy who's been out for 10 years, I didn't understand it at the time, is you have to find something that's, for you that you enjoy outside of the military. Because one of the big problems that, veterans have, that soldiers have, is especially special ops guys, is their entire identity is invested in being a special ops guy. Like that is your entire life. And then you get out of the military and you have nothing, because without the military, you have no identity. Everything you've sunk your life into, you no longer have. So you're literally like starting over from scratch. And that like psychic tug of war, I guess you could call it, is what leads to a lot of problems for people.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of sergeants major when they retire just kind of fall to pieces after a couple of years, because it's like if you don't have soldiers to yell at, how do you stay alive?
Dude, it's a cliche, but it's a true cliche about like infantry sergeant majors who retire and they're dead 6 months later,
and not necessarily by their own hand, but just that's what drove them forward. And if you don't have that other thing, if you don't have some kind of, or just relationships with people who aren't, it's not a sergeant versus sergeants over privates or sergeant over other sergeants kind of relationship. You have to have like an actual friendship back and forth. If you don't have that, yeah, you're probably going to get lonely and fall to pieces and die. Or you can go make racist coffee, I guess. That's also it's also an option that I've seen some people go with.
The thing about like the special operations community is like when you're in it, you really believe like this is the real deal. Like, we're the real men, we're doing the real shit. And everyone else out there is a bunch of pussies and they live in their like fake, fabricated reality. And there's so much like insularity and so much blissful ignorance that I think that when you're in, you don't realize actually how the military has like infantilized you, because you're kept in this sort of environment where I mean, it's like you're going back and forth between war zones. You don't have to think about your taxes. I mean, you don't even have to think about like your wife or raising your kids if you don't want to. I mean, a lot of soldiers do, don't get me wrong. But I'm saying that it takes you out of life, out of the life that, you would ordinarily be living. And you don't have to deal with any of those like day-to-day adult responsibilities. And you're on a military fob overseas, living in this insulated subculture. And even when you're back on the base, I mean, you're on a base, you wear a uniform, you exist in a hierarchical system. There's a rank system. You speak pretty much your own language that civilians can't even understand. You live on a post that has its own movie theater, its own PX, its own shopping centers, its own laundry mats. I mean, everything you can think of. I mean, you don't have to leave the base if you don't want to. And, I do think that the military infantilizes people in a lot of ways that, they don't understand that it's happened to them. I mean, the military has other things that are great about it, that it can, make you man up and take responsibilities and learn new things. There's a lot of positive things about it, but I've had a foot in both of these worlds long enough that I can say that there are, pros and cons to it.
Do you think that there would be maybe a positive outcome if we integrated special forces back into everybody else? Because everybody else is in the rest of the military community. Because as you said, it's very insular. I knew special forces when I was on Boredom in 2009, 2010. There were SF guys out there. I remember going to the PX with some major because I was covering a story about something on the PX because that's what I do. And some guy came by, tall, fucking ripped, really, that lean but muscular, but wearing just shorts out running, but not military PT shorts. And the major I was with just had that like immediate, just like, what the fuck is this soldier doing? And I said, that guy just came from the Special Forces compound, sir. And I was like, it wasn't a like, oh, I'm warning you, sir. It's just like, I'm telling you where that person came from. You need to decide whether or not you're going to flex your rank at that guy because I can tell you, you outrank him, but what's your next move going to be? And the major was just like, oh, okay. And then just kind of we went on with our day. Just because, it's like the special forces is always seen as kind of its own thing. And, in a lot of ways, yes, I think it's good, to be in a community of people that you talk to and you understand. But, if you're hanging out with the dudes doing CrossFit and yoga, you're probably going to be okay. But then there's also the dudes that are, doing cocaine and hiring prostitutes, and you're not going to do so okay. So I just don't know if, like, saying, hey, why don't you go hang out with just some fucking logistics guys for a while? Why don't you go to the motor pool and just be in the motor pool and hang out with the mechanics and do mechanic stuff for a while? Talk to some normal soldiers, the regular day in and day out guys, and kind of get a little bit of perspective. I don't know if that would help out or not.
Man, part of it is also where these military bases are too, because they're in these isolated areas where there's not a lot for a soldier to do, right? And I think if a lot of these guys lived, more in like general population, that would alleviate quite a few of those issues. But I mean, it's an interesting question because, and they hire these like anthropologists working at like think tanks to do these studies on like the culture of special ops and all this kind of stuff, and a lot of it is pretty cheesy. But there's an argument that like you need these tightly knit insular cultures to do the special operations mission, right? Like, I mean, if these guys weren't part of a sort of a cult, could they even do this job? Like, could it even be possible? Because I mean, when we're talking about like socializing people and having them be more normal, well, I mean, like the special ops guys aren't normal, and like they're not expected to be normal, and their mission isn't normal. So it's like this is the interesting sort of like back and forth of like, how do you manage the culture of these units? How do you acknowledge that it's a tight circle, but also not to a point where it gets unhealthy?
Yeah, and you're right. And as I'm very critical about the military in general. I'm especially critical about special forces because it always does seem like they're giving carte blanche to do whatever they want. Go in there, get this information, get this person. We don't care how you do it, just do it. And in a lot of different ways, probably some of the things that they're going to be doing is probably considered war crimes, or at least kind of getting up onto the edge of maybe you shouldn't be doing this. Maybe you're you're making things worse, guys. You're not making things better here. And yeah, I don't know, like maybe they need that, but also maybe if they were hanging out with like just regular Joes, they would do less war crimes. I don't know. Maybe it's something that to explore, perhaps.
Yeah,
I'm sure the military won't, but it's at least an idea.
I mean, I definitely, at the time when I was active duty, I did not understand this at all, and wanted nothing to do with the regular military. And I spent, I was in for 8 years, and I was in special operations the entire time, and had no interest in the regular army. Um, but I mean, I think that it's important to understand that like a professional soldier is a professional soldier, and there are some soldiers who wear a green hat who are completely unprofessional. Um, I don't know. I think it's just like a come to Jesus kind of moment, like come back down to earth and, realize, you're only as good as what you're able to do today. And, you're not better than anybody else. We have to like dragging your ego around in a kit bag is not healthy.
Yeah. And as you said, the biggest thing that would probably help everybody is if they had a hobby that wasn't drinking or playing video games and doing soldier shit.
Yeah, man, big
And, that,
time.
and that's for anybody. That's not just
Yeah,
special
yeah.
forces. If you're in the military and you're active duty, see, I was always reserved, so I always had another personality being built. And when I got out, I got out because it's like I already have a good job, and I don't want the military taking me away from my nice job and my nice family. So I'm going to leave. But if you're still in and you're active duty, like we had a guy join our unit, my reserve unit. He got out of the army after 15 years. Said he's like, nope, I'm done with it. He got out as an E5 sergeant, and then came screaming back to the military. Like within just like he came to my unit, and we kind of integrated him in. But he's like, I have to get back on active duty. Like I can't. He couldn't. He's like, first off, I was 5 years away from retirement, so that was stupid of me to get out. It was stupid of me not to just join the reserves. He got actually all the way out and then was joining back up. But he said he's like I was a sergeant in my 30s, and now I'm just a dude at a call center who is in charge of nothing and does what somebody else tells me to do. And like for a certain of course we in the military we're all used to being told what to do, but at a certain time you get to tell other people what to do. You at least have some kind of power and responsibility. And again, as we talked about the sergeant major who retires and then dies 6 months later, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You haven't built a career, you haven't built a personality. He had a family and everything, but like even that is not. A lot of people have a family, but and that's fine. But your family isn't your hobby; it's your family. Like you got to have
Right, right.
something.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe that's what we need. We need a special forces art class or something where everybody get all of third group, put them all in front of like some canvas and give them some oil paintings and just be like, look, you all get one beer to drink and you get to put whatever emotions or feelings you want onto the canvas. We're going to do this every Friday until you guys fucking stop.
That's like that's just too innovative. That's too disruptive for the military. They just can't handle that.
They wouldn't be able to source that many oil pastels anyway. We can get an F-35 anywhere, but oil, ordering stuff off of Amazon is just well beyond us. If it doesn't have an NSN, we're screwed. All right, so Jack, we've talked a lot about the bad special forces. Let's talk about you. I've not had anybody who's special forces on the show yet, so I wanted to ask.
Fucking bigot.
There's not very many that I respect, so and I don't think there's too many that would also agree to come onto my show if they listen to it at least once. Though I do get a lot of cold emails for guys that are trying to hawk their books of like,
oh, really?
I was a captain that flew airplanes, and now I've got the 10 ways that flying airplanes can make you successful at business. Can I come on your show? Absolutely not, man.
Yeah, man. The like people, I'm very careful about not doing that. Like the people I invite on on my podcast, I want to talk about operations. I want to talk about actual military shit. And a lot of people, yeah, they want to hawk these leadership books. They want to talk about their workout plan. And it's like, dude, I just don't care. Like, don't talk to me about warrior mindset. Like, stop.
Yeah, that is not. I'll bring you on if you wrote an interesting book. Like I brought Joe Kasabian on to talk about Hooligans of Kandahar because that was an interesting book that goes against the grain of every other book written by a soldier in the last 20 years. But yeah, for the most part, I don't want to bring you on.
I did write an interesting book called Murphy's Law. I got cheated out of the Pulitzer Prize for that bad boy. But yeah, no, there's a whole book about my life and times and stupid adventures.
Yeah, I'll have to pick that up. I'm reading a book about Bo Bergdahl's life and time and stupid adventures currently. So,
yeah, American Cipher.
Yeah,
that's a good book.
Yeah. I had Matt on the show, but unfortunately the recording got all screwed up, so we're gonna have to redo that episode at some point. Okay, so Jack, here's the scenario. It's noon local time in Iraq. You're on, I don't know, let's say Balad. You're on a regular base. One that's built up a little bit. You're told that you're going to have to get onto a helicopter at 11 o'clock local time and be flown out somewhere, and you're going to spend 3 days rucking around, doing whatever, doing special forces stuff, and then you'll get on a helicopter. You'll come back. What are you picking up at the PX? What pokey bait are you taking with you?
Oh man, I would probably pack a bunch of granola bars, and yeah, that's probably about it. I'd probably go to like some of the the bar form of food group, so that I can spare myself from the MREs a little bit, like some beef jerky, stuff like that.
Yeah, I was always a big fan of sunflower seeds to replace salt because you're just going to sweat the entire time. And I don't really like Gatorade, so to get salt back into my system, I just had sunflower seeds.
I did not quite I almost but not quite avoided the tobacco. I started dipping when I was in the Q course, and I continued to dip Copenhagen up until I quit the day I left the military and drove home.
That's about the right time to do that.
Yeah.
I would have taken cigarettes, but I imagine special forces. You're probably a lot more dipping than there is smoking, and also
There's
probably
both. I knew guys that dipped and smoked at the same time.
you guys are cut from a completely different cloth. That cloth is insane, and nothing else should be cut from it. All right, so granola bars. Do you guys take anything out to like bribe the locals with?
The fucking cops would always want me to give them bullets.
They, for from your M16 or from your M4, like, do they know that that's not how it works?
Like from my pistol, they'd want like 9 mil rounds, and they look at me with like flexing their hands, open and close, and gimme. So yeah, I mean they were. I mean you could do that, I guess, or you could give them food, stuff like that. I
Some
never.
MREs.
Yeah, I was never really in the dirty business of having to bribe the locals. There were, I was an ops guy, so I was mostly dealing with that.
Well, I know everybody. If anybody doesn't know, pokey bait is the snacks that you take with you on a mission because whatever you're going to be served is going to suck, or it's not going to be enough, or anything along those lines. I know beef jerky was also huge, but I never got into jerky.
The Red Bulls were getting a little out of control in the Chow Hall on the airfield in Mosul around like circa 2005. And I'd have my privates take like shopping bags and like just go up there and fill them up with Red Bulls. And we'd take them out on operations with us. And
the kids today don't understand. Back in the day, all we had was Red Bull and half cans of Rippets, and now you got Monster, you got cocaine, you've got Liquid Death. I don't know what. Actually, sorry, Liquid Death is just sparkling water, which is just very confusing to me. But yeah, there's all kinds of energy drinks. But back in our day, we had Red Bull and we liked it.
Yep, exactly.
I didn't really like it, but we drank it.
Hopped up on Rippets. I mean, I went back to Iraq a few times. One time it was like it was probably like 2016, and I met up with a guy who's a Kurd who's a former interpreter, and like the first thing he says to me, he's like, "Hey, bro, remember Rippets?" It's like, dude, what have we done to these people?
I'm very heartened that after the Taliban took back over Afghanistan once we left, and the Taliban implemented its no women and girls aren't allowed to go to school. It was very heartening to see a lot of the men in Afghanistan say no, screw that. We're gonna boycott. We're gonna stop teaching. We're gonna stop doing these things and tell our sisters. So we did impart some really good things on them, but like also every time I see a half can of Rippets laying on the ground, I'm just like, what have we done to them? We've Americanized them in some good ways and some just absolutely terrible ways.
There was in Iraq there was a local energy drink called Wild Tiger, which is fucking amazing. I don't know what's in that, but I don't think it's street legal here in the United States.
Now, certainly, the cigarettes from Afghanistan weren't they weren't fully tobacco. I can tell you that. I think
Oh,
most.
really?
I think the pine lights were half cardboard.
The Wild Tiger logo, it has a tiger jumping on it, and it says "Total Activation." And then there was another one I found in a small village once, around maybe that same trip. Maybe it was like 2016, and I went in this village and got an energy drink, and it was called Bomba, and it was a glass. It was the glass container shaped like a grenade, like an actual grenade, and it was like a spheroid, like bulging at the center, like a grenade, and then it had a pull top, of course.
It reminds me, in Disney World, the new Star Wars area that they have. When you buy a Coke or a Sprite or something, you don't get it in a cup. You get it in like this ball kind of thing. And Disney had to like go to the Orlando airport and just be like, "Look, people are going to fly home with these. They're not bombs. Please don't please don't freak out about everybody taking home lightsabers and bombs and these bottles, because they're interesting. They're written in like the Star Wars language or something. So people take them home to just put on their shelf or something. And yeah, TSA doesn't like things that look grenade-ish. Unfortunately, even if like it's not a grenade, it's a lighter. Like, yeah, cool. You can't take that either, man. Yeah. So, and Jack, also, I noticed one other thing that you talked about, because it's kind of near and dear to my heart as well. You're a big nerd, just like you would have done great in public affairs, I promise you. But you have a tweet about Dungeons and Dragons and how they are kind of leaving their open source, and they're going to be closed. What are they doing here? What is Wizards of the Coast doing?
Dude, I have a bookshelf with probably like 40 some odd D&D books on it. And actually, you can't see, I'm sitting here on my desk. I paint the miniatures for it. I have for like years.
Oh, so you're brand loyal then. I'm playing. I've been playing a Pulp Cthulhu game with a friend.
Well, I mean, they're miniatures, not just D&D, but you could use them for anything, all sorts of different companies. And but yeah, I have like 300 paints sitting here next to me and airbrushes, and it's bad. It's a full blown addiction.
But you know what though? You're not doing war crimes, which is what's important.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not like blowing fat lines of coke and banging hookers, in my free time.
For all the like making fun of people who do miniatures, like, can you imagine what else those people would be doing with their money and time? I don't want to think about it.
Oh, please, God, yeah, yeah, absolutely. D&D seems like they're like really intent on burning their business and their company down to the ground, and they've gotten really weird, man. Like they've gotten, like, a lot of people would say they got woke, which I guess they did, but it's beyond that. Like it's beyond just like, trying to like, hey, we support BLM. It's not just that, and which that's not that big a deal or anything. But it's that they would start like changing the rules, and there's all this stuff about like genetic determinism or something like that had to be stamped out of the book. Like you can't have certain species that can do that are good at a certain thing. Like dwarves can't have a high constitution because that's racist. It's like, right. Well, hold on a second. We're talking about like a fictional fantasy world here, right?
Right. Like the whole point of, and I don't want to call it, racism inside of Dungeons and Dragons, because, there's plenty of racism inside of the actual, the player sphere and everything. But yeah, it's like, look, I want to play a dwarf because I want to do that. They have the high constitution. If you could just pick anybody and then make them do anything, it just kind of takes the fun.
Why do you have rules? Why do I need to buy a book from you?
Nobody wants an elf that tanks. Like, that doesn't fucking make any sense. You want an elf that's a ranger. You want a human that's a healer. You want a dwarf that rolls in and gets hit by everything and takes all the damage. And that's it. That's all you need.
The movement speed of the characters was changed. So like dwarves and gnomes, they couldn't move as fast as like humans or, a orc or whatever. And they changed that because they said it's ableist. So the dwarves can move the same, they can move just as fast as like a character that's like 7 feet tall. So that's why I'm saying, like, Yeah, you could argue that like D&D got woke, I guess, but I mean, I think it just got weird. Like it surpassed woke and just and went straight to weird.
Yeah, it's an overcorrection. If you know D&D going the good kind of woke would be like, no, we want to have more people, we want to have more characters of color and orientation and things like
And they
that.
also tried to reach out to new types of players because
Right.
the game was like it was what it was. It was like fat white dudes is the stereotype, and there was some truth to it, right? So they tried to reach out, and they have reached out to like, hey, this is a game for everybody. Like anybody can play, which is great. That's not an issue at all.
Yeah, but saying that your dwarves don't get to have high constitution, you're just then it just it's not even a
And you
point. Like,
can't have villainous characters. Like you couldn't have villainous species. That's what it was. So like orcs
uh,
and mind flayers can't be evil anymore. It's like, hey, a mind flayer, like he may have some other sides. There could be some like other aspects of his personality. Like he just eats brains. He's not such a bad guy though. Like,
yeah,
it's like
he
this is
eats everybody's brains, not just like specific
yeah.
people's brains.
It's like this is some weird shit. Like what you just kind of like. I'm not like offended or upset or anything. I'm just kind of like squinting at this at D&D. Like what's going on in your office? Like when you're apologizing for like the Demon Lord Ball. Like what the fuck is going on with this company, man? And then it's just kind of like gone from bad to worse from there. The brand got like really big, really big. I mean, I read they made $1 billion last year. So the D&D is bigger than it's ever been before. And what came with that is they basically made the brand and like all the lore and everything behind it like as vanilla and as generic as possible. Because the more specific it is, the smaller the audience is. You make it more generic, and in theory, the audience is much bigger. You can sell more product to more people. So like the product began to lose its allure, I guess, or its interest and the things that made it interesting. And then the most recent thing, what you were brought up, is the open game license, which was they had an open game license that allowed third parties to develop D&D products. Like you could write your own adventures, you could make your own supplements, you could make your own book of new monsters to use in the game. Like it was all this it was cool stuff. I mean, the third party stuff was cooler than what Wizards of the Coast produced. And like I said, I have a ton of those books on my shelf. They're really cool. And they couldn't use, there were stipulations, right? They couldn't use like the D&D logo and things like that. And there were some, stipulations, but they could use the mechanics of the game to develop their own products and sell it as like an add-on kind of thing. And now it seems they're revoking the open game license, which is suddenly putting like shitloads of people and businesses completely out of work.
Yeah, and as you said in your tweet, nobody's coming here just for what D&D puts out. We want to see what everybody puts out. That's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
whole, building. If you haven't played Dungeons and Dragons or you haven't played tabletop role playing games, you can make up your own story. But a lot of times a game master will just buy a module, or and the module has, here's the story, here's the directions everybody's supposed to go, and so you can do anything with those modules. And if you have something that's like, hey, why don't I'm going to build a module that you can plug and play into this existing book. Like, it just seems like having those people make those modules makes your product more desirable. Like, I'm going to buy. Yes, I'm spending. I don't know how much the books are these days, but I'm spending $25 to $50 on Dungeons and Dragons source books because I also want to spend $100 over here. If I can't spend that $100 over there, well, I don't want this source book anymore. So yeah, it doesn't make sense. I'm just imagining my last game. If my GM told me, because I played a Aarakocra battle mage, if he told me I wasn't allowed to fly because nobody else can, we would have probably had a problem.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's just long term. I mean, I mark my words. I think what the D&D, what the company is trying to do is they want to first off consolidate everything. All these people who are like doing $1 million Kickstarters for their books and stuff like that, they're trying to get a piece of that. But I think what they're also trying to do is like this is a game that was traditionally run with like pencil and paper and a couple books and people sitting around a table. What they want to do is create like a virtual tabletop video game kind of thing, like an app on your phone or computer that you pay a monthly subscription service to, and then they can like upsell you their own kind of supplements and add-ons and stuff like that. Like they see this as this like reoccurring payment wet dream that a lot of corporations have. So they want to stop people from buying those third party products and put everybody on an app that is going to charge our credit cards once a month.
I mean, they did it with D&D Beyond. No, they picked that up not too long ago.
Right. Right.
So, and that's what we built our character sheets for our 5e game in. And then,
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I've played a game during the pandemic and even afterwards. I played a game with people on Fantasy Grounds, a bunch of my friends.
Yeah, we just played over. We used Roll20 for our grid. Grid maps, and then we just built character sheets inside of D&D Beyond, and then we did it over Skype. And
That's cool.
we all live in the same city. We just it's half of us are fathers, and we all got other stuff going on. We can't all just keep showing up at each other's houses.
Yeah. We're gonna try to restart our campaign. Actually, we're restarting it. I think this Saturday or Sunday over this weekend. And then I have a game that I've played with my daughter since she was a little girl, since she was like 7, maybe. We've been playing off and on.
There's a RPG that I just picked up called Hero Kids that I was
that's what we started playing with.
Yeah, cool. That's what I got from my daughter. We haven't done it yet. So does it work with just one kid? Because we don't really have a lot of other kids. Okay, good.
Yep. It'll work fine. It uses just 6-sided dice. The character sheets are really easy to use, and there's a bunch of adventures made for it. Like me and my daughter plowed through all of the That's why we started playing D&D, because we plowed through all those adventures that they make for Hero Kids. And it was like, oh, okay, what do we do next? And I was like, okay, it's go big or go home. So I bought the books and I taught myself how to play it, which was a little difficult, but that's how we ended up playing.
Right on. Jack, thank you so much for coming on. Tell people where they can find your stuff.
Sure, man. Let's see. I write for connectingvets.com, write news, kind of day-to-day news there. Produce podcasts for Stars and Stripes, called Military Matters is the name of that. And then I do my own podcast. Every Friday, we live stream interviews with, former spies, former special ops guys, all kinds of interesting people. And what else? With me and Sean Naylor are starting a Substack to do national security reporting. So that's called The High Side. You can find that out there. You can subscribe to it if you want. And then, that's about it. I'm on Twitter at Jack Murphy RGR. If you want to see all my sarcasm and shit posting, it'll probably show up there. And I think that's it.
Yeah, and Jack comes on this show, so you know that he's not going to be one of those irritating troops that are online. Not one of those shuddy dudes that's going to
definitely be an irritating troop.
Right, but just in a fun way, in a way that's enjoyable. And like I said, also you put out really great stories on connecting vets. So, one of the kind of like Task and Purpose, one of the few places that kind of holds the military's feet to the fire. Because nobody else will at times.
Yeah, man, it's important, and I do believe fully in like telling the good and the bad. The Team House, the podcast I do is like it's pretty much a celebration of military service in a lot of ways, right? It's people telling their stories and genuine reflections and nostalgia and talking about good times and some bad times, some horrible stuff that happens and people talking about how difficult it is to leave the military and transition. But then at the same time, I also write these articles that are, very critical of the special ops community, which, let's just say I'm not loved by the entire special ops community for some of the work I do.
Well, right on. Jack, so much thank you so much for coming on, and everybody else, we'll talk to you next week.